Hello and welcome to In the Kitchen with Mary Mac. Today's classic recipe is banana pudding. This had a lot more going on than I suspected when I looked this up. So you probably know or have had banana pudding, and you've probably had it in the way most of us have, with a vanilla wafer cookie and vanilla pudding and bananas and maybe whipped cream or meringue or something like that. But did you ever think, where on earth did somebody get the idea of making this and there's no banana pudding in it? What is it? Well, I'm here today to tell you what it is. This is a kind of an interesting American food. Banana pudding is purely an American invention with some British background to it. The British background, or United Kingdom background, would be in the name banana pudding, because it is a dessert and you're not making banana pudding per se. So that's where that comes from. Pudding is the word that is used in the United Kingdom for dessert in general. So if you're having dessert, you would say, "What would you like for pudding?" So that's why it's called banana pudding. If you ever wondered, in my opinion, if you use banana flavored pudding to make banana pudding, it's way too much banana. There's a gentle balance in this recipe between bananas and vanilla and creaminess. Another part of this story is banana pudding is kind of known as a Southern dish, but it is not a Southern dish. It is I don't even know how to say it. It is a national dish. Its origins are all over the place. We'll just put it that way. I found a great article on Serious Eats by Robert Moss about the origins of banana pudding and if it's a Southern recipe and why is it a Southern recipe. And it's very interesting. So I took some of my notes from there. But one of the things that, if you've traveled throughout the South, particularly if you have eaten at barbecues in the South, there's usually two desserts offered at a Southern barbecue restaurant. One of them is any sort of cobbler, fruit cobbler, typically peach, sometimes cherry, but a cobbler. And it's usually in its own little individual dish. The other option is banana pudding. Same thing. It's a little banana pudding, usually with whipped cream on it in its own individual dish. It might be a little banana pudding with meringue on it in its own individual dish. But those are usually your two dessert options if you have a tiny, tiny spot of room in your stomach for dessert. I went to a place one time. This was the best that I had ever seen. They used these tiny little, I would say it was very close to being the saucer that you would have with a demi-tasse cup. And that's what the dessert was in. And I'm like, oh, it's perfect. It's like 2 spoonfuls of dessert. Anyway, banana pudding is huge in Southern cooking. Bananas themselves are very popular in our country and have been since their introduction sometime in the area of the Civil War, the mid-1800s to late 1800s. So in the United States, bananas are not something that's grown very commonly. Like you'll see them in Key West or in very, very South Florida. There will be bananas growing. But as far as any sort of large-scale farming of bananas, I don't know of any in the southern United States. However, a lot of things were happening in the mid-1800s. First of all, you had the industrialization of most countries. The thing called the steam engine came out, and then that was applied to different industries. So you had trains, you had ships, various transport with steam engines, various size of ships. And then you had the ability of shipping food when you had those things happening. So bananas were somewhat popular in the early 1800s, but usually only in towns that had a port. New Orleans, along Florida, along the East Coast, you could get bananas, and they would be in the markets. It wasn't a huge thing. They were there, but it wasn't a huge thing. But with the addition of the steamship, that really changed things, because you could get bananas, you could harvest bananas in Central and South America and then put them on a steamship and zip them up to any of the ports, particularly New Orleans. And then they would be put on a train and shipped into the cities. So that by 1875, you really had pretty much bananas everywhere. They were like a novelty fruit. They were good. People liked them.
Oh, people were bananas for them.
They were bananas for them. Yes, there was. And people began to use them in recipes. Now, of course, we've talked about the trifle on here before, and trifle was a popular recipe coming out of Europe, came to the United States with European immigrants, and then continued to be popular. Why? Because it was easy to make. You could use up stale cake and cookies and whatever you wanted to, mix it with a little bit of fruit, and you had a dessert, put some whipping cream in there. So that was like a classic dessert already. You bring in this new fruit, the banana, wow, it fit right into that model. It fit right in. So people started using that as a sort of a dessert, sometimes cooked, sometimes not, but in a pudding. Due to the nature of the banana, even now, you buy bananas at the grocery store, they're lime green one day, and then 3 days later, they have brown spots all over them. They ripen very quickly, okay? So shipping them quickly was important. Packing them in ice was important. Getting them where they needed to go safely was important. So it was a really big up-and-coming industry. So by 1874, you could find bananas in most fruit markets in any large city and even some small cities. By 1878, the first newspaper recipe mention is found. A person who's looking for a receipt, which is the old word for recipe, they're looking for a receipt for a frozen banana pudding. By 1887, banana pudding was a staple dessert in American homes, and by 1888, a recipe is in the Good Housekeeping magazine, which was, yes, being published in 1888. This was a Massachusetts-based periodical. I don't know if it's still based out of there, but Good Housekeeping, for goodness sake. What a classic source to find a recipe. So there's a recipe in there. In the 1890s, all of the newspapers, because that's where you find those old recipes, all of the newspapers had recipes for banana puddings. Various ways you made it. They basically all used a custard base. They used bananas, of course. Some of them used sponge cake. Some of them used pound cake. Some were cold. Some were hot. Some were topped with a meringue. Some were topped with whipped cream. Some were even frozen, interestingly enough. So then a big change happened. Somebody got the bright idea to use vanilla wafers. Amazing! What a life-changing event this was. Now, it's the 1920s, and here are some interesting things that happened in the 1920s. First of all, bananas were used to treat celiac disease before anybody knew what celiac disease was.
Bananas were used?
Bananas. Apparently, children were getting sick in their stomachs, in their digestive systems. Nobody knew why. Some were even dying from it. So a doctor named Dr. Haas got this idea to feed children bananas because bananas were very good. They were natural, and they shouldn't cause any digestive problems, because he noticed when he was in Puerto Rico that people who ate breads and things like that a lot were sick, but people who ate bananas were not, which was kind of an odd thing to notice, but hey, he did. So anyway, he brought this information back to the United States and began a program with these young patients of feeding them banana diets, and it really helped. And the reason it helped, of course, is because they weren't getting the gluten protein from eating breads and starches and things. So it made a big difference. Many lives were saved because of this. And years later, I want to say it was like in the 1950s when they discovered celiac disease, but this was an early treatment for celiac disease in the 1920s, largely because bananas were available to any level of society. Even people with very little money could afford bananas. And the reason why is because the shipping, the availability, the shipping, the farming of bananas had been growing and growing and growing and growing. Another interesting side note here, which I discovered on the bananas that I purchased to make my banana pudding, is that 125 years ago in 1899, some brothers from Sicily named Joseph Felix and Luca Vaccaro and a friend of theirs, Salvador D'Antoni, started a business. They were Sicilians living in New Orleans, and they started a business which ended up being Standard Fruit. And they began importing bananas into the port of New Orleans. Those people ended up becoming a part of the Dole Fruit Company. So this year in 2024 is the 125th anniversary of Dole Bananas, which is kind of a cool side note here for bananas. Among the classic banana desserts which were being made were bananas being cooked in a sugary syrup, bananas being put into cakes and bread, and of course our banana pudding. So all of these things worked together to make, number one, bananas were being marketed like crazy, and a key to marketing something like that is recipes. So having recipes in newspapers, magazines, periodicals really got people interested in the bananas. And then certain areas of the country started developing these banana recipes that they were known for. And then we are getting to the point here in the 1920s where bananas are becoming, they're just going bananas, I guess I would say. So in the 1920s, a really big thing happened. These vanilla wafers began being used. And they were basically exactly what you know them to be today, just a vanilla cookie. A couple of companies were making them. And in 1921, a Mrs. Laura Curley contributed a recipe to the Bloomington, Illinois Pantograph for banana pudding using custard, 6 sliced bananas, and 1 pound of vanilla wafers. So that's like one of the very earliest banana pudding recipes. Then, the same year in Atlanta, a Mrs. F.A. Smith shared her recipe for banana pudding in the Atlanta Women's Club cookbook. And this modern classic really officially took root. So by the 1940s, the Nabisco Company, which was the National Biscuit Company, that's all slammed together like you would in Western Pennsylvania. You slam it together and now it's Nabisco, was putting the banana pudding recipe on their box of vanilla wafers. So were other companies that made vanilla wafers. They were putting some sort of a banana pudding recipe on the box as a promo. The Jell-O Company in the 1960s developed a banana-flavored pudding. So that was marketed to make your banana pudding. Then another company, which I forgot to write down and I don't remember the name of, developed a whipped cream that was made out of oil, and you stored it in the freezer and served it, known as Cool Whip. So in the 1960s, because the 1960s, if you've ever seen an old cookbook, were all about convenience. High-speed convenience cooking. Oh, yes, and Jell-O.
Yes, so many things made of Jell-O
Yes.
that you're like, why? Why is that in Jell-O?
So, banana pudding took on this robe and just strutted in it, because now you could make banana pudding almost from scratch. You could use Jell-O to make your pudding instead of making scratch pudding and cooking and all that jazz. Then you could use Cool Whip to put on top of it, and you already had your Nilla wafers, the recipe right on the box. You're all set. You could whip up one of these desserts in no time. Now you've got all these ways to make banana pudding. You could make custard. You could make regular old vanilla pudding. You could make instant pudding. You could use pound cake. You could use sponge cake. You could use vanilla cookies. You could use whipped cream. You could put meringue on it. There's 100 ways. And here's a funny thing, because I'm sure you've listened to this podcast before and heard how many fights there are about the proper way to do anything in cooking. Guess what? There's no fights for banana pudding. No one cares.
That's because everybody loves it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and they love it in all the ways it's made. So there is no, how I come on here and rant about the proper way to make wedding soup or whatever. There is no proper way to make banana pudding. You can make it any way you want to make it. So banana pudding is a, I don't know, it's banana pudding
Unites us all.
unites us all. Yes, there you go. It unites us all. There's some discussion over why it's called, like a lot of the recipes will say Southern banana pudding. They throw Southern before it. Nobody knows why that is. There's a lot of discussion as to why banana pudding is so popular in the South. And in the Serious Eats article, Robert Moss does touch on it, but I can say with 100% accuracy that I know what it is. I know what it is. Because in the South, a thing is loved in the South, and that is a creamy, sweet casserole type dessert is loved in the South. Even the casseroles in the South are extra rich and creamy and buttery and sweet and tasty. And, most of the vegetable dishes, if you get a recipe for, say, like squash casserole, okay? Squash casserole is going to have squash in it, of course. It's also going to have butter, sugar, salt, pepper, milk, eggs. Every vegetable casserole that you encounter in Southern cooking nearly has those same ingredients because they love that kind of thing. It's just, it's so rich. They love rich, rich flavors. And banana pudding gives you this rich, delicious flavor, and it's super easy to make, and you can make a vat of it. You can take the recipe and quadruple it, or I don't know, multiply it times 20, whatever that word is. And it comes out the same. It tastes the same. The taste is going to be consistent no matter how large of a vat of this you make. And in the South, nothing is more popular than a great big potluck dinner, like at a funeral or a wedding or a family reunion or a Sunday or a Saturday or whenever you want to have it. There's a lot of eating events in Southern cooking. Now, of course, we do that in the North too. Minnesota is known for their potluck dinners.
I think it's probably easier in places where it's warm weather most of the time, though.
To have gatherings, yes. So gatherings are huge in the South, and this is something that's easy to make. This is basically, like I said, it's a trifle. It's a dessert. It's a pudding. And it's a unique combination of some staple kitchen items that turn out a delicious dessert. So there you have it, banana pudding. That humble banana pudding that you love. We've just raised it up. We've raised it up many notches. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you look on the vanilla wafer box or the generic vanilla wafer boxes or the Dole banana website or the Jell-O pudding website, you'll find various recipes for making banana pudding. None of them are the same. So I encourage you to do that because it's kind of a fun read to see all these different ways of making banana pudding. Now I'm going to give you my way of making banana pudding, and I'm also going to give you a scratch pudding recipe. This is not a custard. This is a pudding. You can make this pudding with any type of milk that you choose to use. A lot of instant pudding will not set up if you use anything less than like 2% milk. So this recipe is excellent because it uses regular sugar, cornstarch, salt, milk, any milk you want to use, butter or margarine, and vanilla. Therefore, this recipe can be vegan. It can be gluten-free if you choose. It can be sugar-free if you choose. You can use a sugar-free sweetener in it. This is a very forgiving recipe. It comes from the side of a box of Hodgson Mills from about 30 years ago, Hodgson Mills cornstarch. I cut this off because I wanted to save the pudding recipes, and thank God I did because they don't put it on anymore, and I don't know why that is, but hey. This banana pudding, as we said, it unites us all because you can make banana pudding vegan. You can make it sugar-free by using a sugar-free sweetener, the type of vanilla wafers that are sugar-free. You have to, now the vanilla wafers vary a bit, so if you're going to do this vegan, you'll have to do something, you'll have to look for a vegan substitute for a vanilla wafer, and guess what? The vanilla Oreos are vegan. So if you can get some little kid to eat that cream out of the middle, you just save all those cookies. Actually, I was thinking it would be good with the vanilla Oreos as is. Wow, that would be an extra. Oh, I thought of that when I was doing this. So, you'd have to watch that for vegan. Gluten-free, same thing. You can get gluten-free vanilla wafers. So this truly is a recipe that unites us all. So if you're looking for something to make for someone who has particular dietary needs, or for yourself for particular dietary needs, or if you want to make it a little bit lower calorie or whatever, you can easily do that yourself by adjusting the ingredients that I'm going to give you. This pudding recipe, though, if you're careful and you don't scorch it, it's literally foolproof. I know somebody will write to me and say, well, it didn't work for me, but I'm going to tell you, I have scorched it. And if you scorch the pudding, you just pour it out and don't scrape the pan, and it's fine. I have had lumps appear, and I pressed it through a sieve. I've had every version of this, but I can tell you that it sets up, doggone it, which is better than most of my Jellos. So here we go, finally, your recipe for Mary Mac's banana pudding. So first we're going to make the pudding, and you can make this the evening before, the day before, and put it in the refrigerator and let it set up and then make your banana pudding the next day. Or you can just let the pudding cool and put it together warm. That won't hurt it any. So here we go. For the vanilla pudding, you'll need a heavy bottom 2-quart pan, and you'll need a stainless steel whisk. You'll need a 1/3 cup of sugar, a 1/4 cup of cornstarch, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 3/4 cup of milk, whatever kind you want to use, 2 tablespoons of butter or margarine, and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So first, in your pan, put your sugar, cornstarch, and salt, and take your whisk and mix them together. Now, you're going to put those on your burner and put your burner on medium-low and slowly add your milk and whisk that in and make sure that it's very, very well blended. If you mix your cornstarch, sugar, and salt together first, it mixes in so much better because cornstarch does not like to mix in with liquid easily. So now you want to cook this over medium heat for about 15 or 20 minutes, stirring fairly often. So what I do is I set a timer for like 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'll go do something and keep coming back to it until I get into it where it's really starting to thicken. Then you want to keep stirring it. And you'll get to a point that it'll begin to slowly bubble. When you get to that point, you're going to remove it from the heat, and you're going to stir in your 2 tablespoons of butter and your 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and you're going to mix that really well. And then you're going to pour that into a glass bowl to chill. If you happen to have some of your pudding stick or scorch on the bottom of the pan, don't panic. Just pour it out and then very carefully take a rubber scraper and get the edges of the pan and what you can, and don't scrape that stuff into it, okay? Now, once you have that into your bowl, take some plastic wrap and put over the top and press that right onto the top of the pudding, because that'll keep it from forming a skin. Sometimes cooked puddings will form a skin on the top that's kind of like rubber, and amazingly, it stays together like rubber. Now, once you have your pudding made, you can either just put that in the refrigerator and let it cool for a little while you're doing the rest, or you can leave it till the next day. Now, to make your banana pudding, find a nice bowl with a lid. I would say about a 1.5 to 2 quart container. You'll need 4 to 6 nice sized bananas. If they're real big bananas, like 4, and if they're smaller, 6 or so. And you want them to be nice and ripe. They can be pretty ripe, however ripe you like them. You'll need the 4 to 6 bananas, and then you'll need 1 box of vanilla wafers, or like I said, vanilla Oreos, or some type of gluten-free vanilla cookies. And then you're going to layer like this. This is another thing that varies in the recipes, how the layers go. I've always layered this way, and I'm looking at these recipes going, wow, I would have never thought of doing it the way these people are doing it. But anyway, here we go. So first you're going to lay down a layer of the cookies. Then on top of those, you're going to put a layer of bananas. And I usually slice the bananas in circles about 1/4 of an inch thick. So then you're going to cover your cookies with bananas. And then you're going to take half of your amount of pudding and put it over the bananas and spread that out. And then you're going to repeat. You're going to put another layer of cookies, another layer of bananas, and another layer of pudding and smooth that out. Now, you want to put that into the refrigerator for, I would say, at least 4 hours, or you can put it in overnight because you want the cookies to kind of almost disintegrate in there. You want them to soak up the moisture from the pudding and be very soft. And you want the bananas to kind of flavor the pudding a little bit. And then when you get ready to serve this, you're going to scoop it into dishes and then top it with whipped cream. And this is excellent. I also do this in individual dishes sometimes. If you have like a 1-cup glass serving dishes or even little glass containers with a lid, I do this for my husband sometimes. I make individual banana puddings so that he doesn't eat like a half of a batch of banana pudding. And I'll put them in individual containers, and that works really well too. And you just layer them the same way. Nilla wafer banana pudding, Nilla wafer banana pudding, and there you are, and you're done. This is my version of banana pudding, and as far as it goes, it's just as good as all the other versions of banana pudding. I like it with whipped cream on top. If you wanted to dress it up a little bit, you could crush up some of your Nilla wafers and sprinkle them on top of that for a little, whatever. But this is it. This is so good. Such a simple little dessert, and it's so good, which is why I think it's so popular still. If you haven't made it in a while, here it is May. You have Memorial Day coming up. You have the 4th of July. Make some banana pudding and take it to a picnic, why don't you?
And make sure to check us out online on Facebook and Threads at Mary Mac Bakehouse, on Instagram at Mary Mac Bakehouse and Mary Mac Podcast, and on our website, marymacpodcast.com.
Thanks a lot for listening if you did, and if you didn't, too bad for you.